The old man worked alone on the dead planet where nothing grew and nothing lived except him. His name was Dongsu, and he had been digging for rare metals in the asteroid rocks for 3 years now. His hands were rough and his back was bent from the heavy work, but his eyes were still sharp and missed nothing. He was 70 years old, but he moved like someone who had learned to be careful about everything. The mining station was small and simple, just a few metal buildings connected by covered walkways. Inside were the machines that crushed rock and separated the valuable metals from the worthless stone. Dongsu knew every sound the machines made and could tell when something was wrong, just by listening. He lived in one small room with a bed and a table and pictures of his family on the wall. Every morning he would get up before the sun rose over the rocky hills and check all his equipment. The drilling machines had to be cleaned and oiled. The sorting machines needed their filters changed. The communication radio had to be tested in case he needed help. But Dongsu never called for help. He fixed everything himself and solved every problem that came up. On this morning, something was different. The radio was picking up strange signals from space, not the usual chatter from trading ships or mining company messages. These signals were harsh and full of anger. Dongsu listened carefully and realized they were coming from ships that were getting closer to his planet. He had heard stories about raiders who attacked lonely mining stations, but he had never seen any. The signals got stronger as the morning went on. Dongsu could tell there were at least 6 ships heading his way, big ships with powerful engines and heavy weapons. He thought about running, but there was nowhere to go. His own ship was too small and too slow to escape. The nearest help was weeks away, so he did what he always did when there was a problem. He got ready to deal with it. Dongsu put away his tools very carefully. He cleaned his workbench and turned off all the machines. He made sure all the valuable metals were stored properly in the safe containers. Then he went to his room and looked at the pictures of his family. His wife Minseo, who had died 5 years ago. His son Wu Bin, who had been a soldier. His daughter Hyejin, who was a pilot. His granddaughter Sujin, who was still in school. He touched each picture gently and then put on his best clothes. If these were raiders coming to kill him, he wanted to die with dignity. If they were slavers who wanted to capture him, he wanted to look like someone who deserved respect. Dongsu had learned long ago that how you face trouble was more important than the trouble itself. The ships arrived at noon when the sun was highest in the sky. They came down from orbit like falling meteors with trails of fire behind them. Dongsu watched from his window as they landed in a circle around his mining station. The ships were black and covered with spikes and sharp edges. They looked like they were built for war and death. The doors of the ships opened and creatures came out that made Dongsu catch his breath. They were 8 feet tall with gray skin covered in scales. Their hands ended in claws that looked like they could cut through metal. Their mouths were full of teeth like knives. Their eyes glowed red in their skull-like faces. These were not raiders or slavers. These were predators who hunted other living things for sport. The leader of the creatures was bigger than the others and had more scars on his body. He wore armor made from the bones of things he had killed. His claws were longer and sharper than the rest. When he walked, his soldiers followed behind him like a pack of wolves following their alpha. His name was Veltar, and he had never lost a hunt in his entire life. Veltar looked at the small mining station and laughed. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. He had expected to find a colony with hundreds of people to hunt and kill. Instead, there was just this tiny outpost in the middle of nowhere. But maybe there would still be some fun to be had. Yeah, soldiers needed practice, and even one human would be better than nothing. The creatures surrounded the main building where Dongsu waited for them. They moved like hunters who knew exactly what they were doing. Some went to the back exits to cut off escape routes. Others positioned themselves where they could see all the windows. The rest followed their leader to the main door. They had done this many times before on many different worlds. Dongsu heard their footsteps on the metal walkways, heavy boots that rang like hammers on the steel floors. He heard them talking in their harsh language about what they would do to him. Some wanted to kill him quickly. Others wanted to take him back to their ship and make the death last longer. All of them were disappointed that there was only one human to play with. When they broke down his door, Dongsu was sitting at his table with his hands folded in front of him. He looked up at the massive creatures crowding into his small room and showed no fear on his face. This surprised them because most prey animals screamed or ran or begged for mercy. This old human just sat there looking at them like he was studying something interesting. Veltar stepped forward and showed his teeth in what might have been a smile. He spoke in broken human language that he had learned from previous victims. He told Dongsu that he was now a prisoner and would be taken to their ship for questioning and entertainment. He said the human should feel honored because not many creatures got to see the inside of a Kethran hunting vessel before they died. Dongsu stood up slowly and raised his hands to show he was not armed. He was much smaller than the aliens and looked fragile next to their muscled bodies and natural weapons. Some of the soldiers laughed at how weak and helpless he appeared. They had hunted dangerous creatures on 100 worlds, but this old man looked like he would break if they breathed on him too hard. They put metal restraints on his wrists that were designed for much larger and stronger prisoners. The restraints hung loose on his thin arms. They pushed him outside where their ships waited with engines still hot from the journey through space. Other soldiers were loading containers of the rare metals he had spent years collecting. They were stealing his life work along with his freedom. As they forced him up the ramp into the biggest ship, Dongsu spoke his first words to his captors. His voice was calm and quiet, but somehow all the aliens heard him clearly. "Thank you for the tour," he said. The creatures looked at each other in confusion. They did not understand why this human was thanking them for capturing him. But something in the way he said it made them feel uncomfortable, like maybe they had made a mistake. The inside of the Kethran ship was like a nightmare made of metal and darkness. The walls were covered with the bones and skulls of creatures the aliens had killed on their hunts. Strange weapons hung from hooks like trophies. The air smelled of blood and fear and death. Red lights cast evil shadows that moved and shifted as the ship flew through space toward an unknown destination. The soldiers dragged Dongsu through long corridors past rooms where he could hear screaming and crying. They enjoyed showing him the torture chambers where previous prisoners had died slowly. They wanted him to be afraid like all their other victims. But the old man just looked around calmly like he was taking a tour of a museum. He seemed more interested than frightened by everything he saw. The prison section was deep in the lower parts of the ship where the engine noise was loudest. The cells were small metal cages barely big enough for a person to lie down. Dozens of different creatures were locked inside them. Some looked like giant insects with too many legs. Others were covered in fur or scales or feathers. All of them had given up hope of ever escaping from this floating hell. They threw Dongsu into an empty cell and locked the heavy door with electronic locks that would kill anyone who tried to touch them. The cell had no windows and only a small slot where they could push food and water inside. A thin mattress on the floor was the only furniture. The walls were covered with scratches made by previous prisoners who had tried to claw their way out. In the cell next to his was a creature with blue skin and 4 arms. Her name was Zephyra, and she had been a ship engineer before the Kethran destroyed her homeworld. She had been a prisoner for 2 months and had seen many other captives come and go. Most of them ended up in the torture chambers or the fighting arena where they died for the entertainment of the crew. On his other side was Mordak, a warrior whose people had fought bravely against the Kethran invasion. He had 6 arms and skin-like armor, but even his natural weapons had not been enough to save his planet. His family had been killed in front of him before he was captured. Now he spent his days planning impossible escapes that would never work. Dongsu introduced himself to his fellow prisoners in a quiet voice that somehow carried through the metal walls. He told them he was from a planet called Earth and that his people were called humans. Most of the aliens had never heard of either Earth or humans. They thought he must be from some backwater world that was not worth conquering. The old man began sharing stories about his home and his family. He talked about his grandfather Jin Ho, who had lived through a terrible war when enemy soldiers occupied their country. Jin Ho had survived by being patient and clever instead of trying to fight with weapons he did not have. He waited and watched and learned until he found ways to help his people that the enemies never expected. He told them about his father Kyung Min, who had rebuilt their family farm after bombs destroyed everything they owned. Kyung Min did not waste time being angry about what was lost. Instead, he studied the damaged land and figured out how to make it productive again. He taught his son that every problem was just another puzzle waiting to be solved. Zephrah listened to these stories and wondered if the old human was trying to make himself feel better by remembering happier times. But there was something in his voice that was different from other prisoners. He did not sound like someone who had accepted defeat. He sounded like someone who was making plans. The Kethran guards came by several times each day to select prisoners for their cruel games. Sometimes they wanted someone to fight in the arena against their young warriors for training. Sometimes they took prisoners to the torture chambers to practice new methods of causing pain. Sometimes they just killed someone because they were bored. When the guards stopped at Dongsu's cell and studied him through the metal bars, he looked back at them without fear. His eyes examined their weapons and their armor and the way they moved. He was learning about them the same way they thought they were learning about him. But they only saw an old man who looked too weak to be interesting. He saw predators who had patterns and weaknesses. One day they dragged away a young reptilian prisoner named Lethan, whose crime was trying to hide his family when the Kethran invaded his world. The other prisoners knew they would never see him alive again. The guards always came back laughing and covered in blood after their entertainment sessions. But this time Dongsu spoke up as they were leaving. "Do you know what makes a predator successful?" he asked in a voice so calm it made the guards stop walking. They turned around and stared at this strange human who dared to ask them questions. One of them answered that claws and teeth and strength made predators successful. They showed off their natural weapons and flexed their powerful muscles. Dongsu nodded like he was thinking carefully about their answer. Then he said that humans had a different idea about what made predators successful. The guards laughed and asked what weak creatures like humans could possibly know about being predators. They said humans looked like prey animals with their soft skin and small teeth and weak bodies. The old man just smiled and said they would find out soon enough. Something in the way he said it made the guards uncomfortable. They had been hunting and killing for their entire lives, but this prisoner made them feel like they were the ones being hunted. They left quickly without taking any more prisoners. That day, Commander Veltar heard about this strange conversation from his guards. He was curious about this human who showed no fear and seemed to know things about predators. He ordered his science team to study everything they could find about Earth and the human species. He wanted to understand what made this old man so confident. The scientists worked for days searching their databases for information about humans. What they found was disturbing. Human bodies were designed for endurance hunting. Their bones were dense and strong. Their muscles were built for long-distance running. Their brains were large and complex with areas specialized for planning and problem-solving. Most worrying of all humans had forward-facing eyes like all predator species. Their hands were designed for using tools and weapons. Their teeth were meant for eating meat as well as plants. Everything about human anatomy suggested they were hunters, not prey. But they looked so weak and harmless compared to proper predators like the Kethran. The scientists brought their report to Commander Veltar, who read it with growing unease. He had conquered hundreds of worlds and enslaved thousands of species. All of them had fought with the desperate fury of prey animals trying to escape death. None of them had ever made him feel uncertain about the outcome of a hunt. But this one old human was different somehow. That night Dongsu lay on his thin mattress and listened to the sounds of the ship around him. The engine vibrations told him how fast they were traveling and in which direction. The footsteps in the corridors told him about guard rotations and shift changes. The voices of the crew told him about their fears and their weaknesses. He thought about his wife Minseo, who had taught him that patience was the most powerful weapon anyone could possess. She had shown him that people revealed their secrets if you just listened carefully enough. She had been right about everything, and he missed her wisdom every day. In the morning, he would continue learning about his captors and sharing stories with his fellow prisoners. He would plant seeds of hope in their hearts and teach them that giving up was the only real defeat. The Kethran thought they had captured a helpless old man, but they had actually brought their greatest enemy aboard their own ship. Soon, they would learn the difference between predators and apex predators. Soon they would understand why humans had survived and thrived on a world full of creatures bigger and stronger than themselves. Soon the hunters would become the hunted. Commander Veltar could not sleep that night after reading the science report about humans. He kept thinking about the old prisoner who showed no fear. and asked strange questions about predators. Every instinct told him that Dongsu was dangerous, but his eyes saw only a weak, elderly creature who could barely fill out his prison clothes. The contradiction made him angry and confused. In the morning, he decided to break the human spirit once and for all. He would show his crew and the other prisoners what happened to anyone who dared to challenge Kethran's superiority. The commander ordered his guards to bring Dongsu to the main arena, where the warriors practiced their combat skills. It was time to remind everyone who the real predators were. The arena was a large circular room with metal walls that rose up to viewing platforms, where the crew could watch fights and executions. The floor was covered with sand that had been stained dark brown by the blood of countless victims. Weapons of different sizes and shapes hung on the walls like decorations. The air smelled of death and violence and fear. Dozens of Kethran soldiers gathered in the viewing platforms to watch the entertainment. They laughed and made bets about how long the old human would survive against one of their warriors. Most thought he would die in less than 10 seconds. A few generous ones gave him 30 seconds before his blood would join the stains on the arena sand. Veltar stood on the highest platform where everyone could see him. His armor was polished, and his claws were sharp and ready. He spoke in a voice that carried throughout the entire arena, so that all his crew would hear his words. He said that the human prisoner had forgotten his place and needed to be reminded that the Kethran were the ultimate predators in the galaxy. He offered Dongsu a deal that seemed generous, but was really just another form of torture. If the old man could survive for 1 full minute against their weakest trainee, then all the prisoners would receive better food for a week. If he lost, then every captive would have their food reduced to starvation rations. Either way, the human would die, but this way other prisoners would suffer for his arrogance. The guards brought Dongsu into the arena and removed his restraints so he could move freely. He stood in the center of the bloody sand and looked around at all the Kethran faces staring down at him. His expression was calm and thoughtful, like he was studying an interesting puzzle rather than facing his own death. This strange reaction made some of the soldiers shift uncomfortably in their seats. The trainee they chose to fight him was named Gethmore, and he was considered the weakest warrior in the entire crew. But even he was 8 feet tall with muscles, like iron cables and claws that could tear through steel plating. He had killed dozens of prisoners in practice fights and had never lost a single combat. Against an elderly human, he expected to win in seconds. Gethmore entered the arena with his claws extended and his teeth bared in a savage grin. He moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator who had been born to hunt and kill. The crowd cheered and shouted encouragement as he circled around the old human like a cat playing with a mouse. Everyone knew this would be over very quickly, but when the fight began, something unexpected happened that made the entire arena fall silent. Gethmore charged forward with his claws aimed at Dongsu's throat, intending to end the fight with one quick strike. The human did not try to run or dodge, or block the attack. Instead, he stepped slightly to one side and used his hands to redirect the trainee's momentum. The young Kethran found himself flying through the air in a direction he had not planned to go. He crashed into the arena wall with a sound like thunder and slid down to the sand in a dazed heap. The crowd could not believe what they had just seen. How had a weak old human thrown a trained warrior across the room without using any weapons or apparent strength? Gethmore shook his head to clear it and attacked again with more fury and less control. This time he slashed with both sets of claws in a pattern that should have cut the human into pieces. But somehow Dongsu was never where the claws expected him to be. He moved like water flowing around rocks always, just out of reach, but never seeming to hurry. The trainee became frustrated and began making wild attacks that left him off balance and exposed. Each time he overextended himself, the old human would grab his arm or leg and use his own force against him. Within 20 seconds, Gethmore was breathing hard and covered in sweat. Within 30 seconds, he was stumbling from exhaustion and confusion. The HFY final move came so fast that most watchers missed it completely. Gethmore launched himself forward in a desperate attempt to tackle his opponent to the ground. Dongsu simply stepped aside, grabbed the trainee's wrist, and applied pressure to a specific point. The massive warrior collapsed instantly and lay, still on the blood-stained sand. The arena was completely quiet except for the sound of breathing and the hum of the ship's engines. Every Kethran soldier stared in shock at the scene below them. Their weakest trainee lay unconscious while the frail old human stood over him, looking like he had just finished a gentle exercise. Nothing like this had ever happened before in their long history of conquest. Commander Veltar felt his world shifting beneath his feet like the deck of a ship in a storm. Everything he believed about strength and predators, and the natural order of things, was being challenged by what he had just witnessed. His voice shook slightly as he demanded to know how a weak human had defeated a trained Kethran warrior. Dong-Su looked up at the commander with the same calm expression he had worn throughout the entire fight. He explained that humans had been learning fighting techniques for thousands of years of constant warfare. They had studied every possible way that one creature could defeat another creature. They had learned that true strength came from understanding your opponent better than they understood themselves. He mentioned a man named Tae-Jin who had been a master of martial arts back on Earth. Tae-Jin had taught him that the strongest opponent was often the easiest to defeat because strength without wisdom was just another weakness to exploit. Big muscles and sharp claws meant nothing if you did not know how to use them properly against someone who understood leverage and timing. The Mira, Kethran soldiers looked at each other with growing unease. They had spent their entire lives believing that bigger and stronger always meant better. Their whole culture was built on the idea that natural weapons and physical power determined who was predator and who was prey. Now, an old human was telling them that intelligence and technique could overcome any advantage. Veltar's pride would not let him accept defeat so easily. If one warrior was not enough, then he would use more warriors. He ordered 3 of his best fighters to enter the arena and attack the humans simultaneously. Surely no creature could stand against multiple trained predators working together. This would prove once and for all that Kethran superiority was real. Before the 3 warriors entered the arena, Dong-Su asked for a moment to remove his jacket. He folded it carefully and set it aside like he was preparing for serious work. As he did this, he told another story about his family that made the watching soldiers even more uncomfortable than they already were. He spoke about his son Wu Bin, who had been a special forces soldier in the human military. Wu Bin had died defending a village from raiders who outnumbered his unit 10-1. But before he died, he had taught those raiders why humans were the most dangerous species on their planet. He had shown them what happened when you threatened, something a human cared about. The 3 Kethran warriors charged forward together with their claws flashing and their teeth bared. They had planned their attack carefully to come from different angles so the human could not escape. But once again, Dong-Su did not try to escape. He moved between them like he was dancing to music only he could hear. What followed was not really a fight, but more like a lesson in how much the Kethran did not understand about combat. The old human used each warrior's attacks against the other 2. He made them crash into each other and tangle their claws and trip over their own feet. Within minutes, all 3 lay groaning on the arena floor while Dong-Su stood untouched in the center. The silence that followed was deeper than space itself. Every creature on the ship had heard the sounds of battle, and now they heard nothing but victory. For the first time in their history, the Kethran had been defeated by something they had considered prey. The natural order of their universe had been turned upside down by one old human who understood things they had never imagined. Commander Veltar stared down at his beaten warriors and felt something he had never experienced before. It took him several moments to recognize the emotion as fear. Not fear of death or pain, but fear that everything he had believed about himself and his people might be wrong. Fear that they might not be the ultimate predators they thought they were. The atmosphere on the Kethran ship changed completely after Dong-Su defeated the 3 warriors in the arena. The crew whispered to each other in dark corners about what they had witnessed. Some said the old human had used magic or technology they did not understand. Others wondered if their commanders had been lying to them about Kethran's superiority all their lives. Fear spread through the ship like poison in water. The guards who had once laughed at Dong-Su now avoided looking directly at him when they brought food to his cell. They no longer made jokes about weak humans or soft prey animals. Instead, they watched him with the careful attention that predators gave to dangerous enemies. They had seen what he could do with his bare hands, and none of them wanted to test their luck against him. In the prison section, The other captives looked at their human cellmate with new hope in their eyes. For months they had believed that escape was impossible, and death was their only future. But now they had seen one of their own defeat multiple Kethran warriors without weapons or armor. If an old man could do that, then maybe there was still a chance for all of them. Dongsu continued sharing stories with his fellow prisoners, but now they listened with different ears. When he talked about his daughter Hyejin, who had become a pilot, they heard lessons about finding weaknesses in complex machines. When he described his late wife Minseo, who had been a teacher, they understood that knowledge was a weapon more powerful than any claw or tooth. Zephyra, the blue-skinned engineer, began studying the prison systems with new interest. Before she had looked at the electronic locks and force fields as unbreakable barriers. Now she examined them as puzzles that could be solved by someone clever enough to understand how they worked. Her 4 arms moved quickly as she traced power, conduits, and identified potential failure points. Mordak, the 6-armed warrior, started organizing the stronger prisoners into groups that could work together effectively. He had given up hope after his family was killed, but now he felt the fire of purpose burning in his chest again. If they were going to attempt an escape, they would need coordination and planning, not just individual courage. Even Lethan the young reptilian who had been taken for torture had been returned to his cell alive. The guards had been too unsettled by Dongsu's victory to enjoy their usual cruel games. Instead, they had just beaten the prisoner half-heartedly and brought him back. Lethan could not understand why he was still breathing, but he was grateful to the strange human who had somehow saved his life. Commander Veltar spent his time locked in his private quarters trying to understand what had happened in the arena. He replayed the fight over and over in his mind, but could not figure out how an old human had made his warriors look like clumsy children. Everything he thought he knew about combat and predators had been challenged by what he witnessed. He ordered his science team to dig deeper into human history and biology. He wanted answers about how this species had developed such fighting abilities. What they found in their research made his blood run cold. Earth was a death world where humans had evolved alongside creatures that should have killed them all millions of years ago. The scientists brought him reports about human ancestors who had hunted woolly mammoths with nothing but sharp sticks and teamwork. They had chased swift gazelles across endless plains until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They had outsmarted cave bears and saber-toothed cats and every other predator on their planet by using intelligence instead of strength. Most disturbing of all was the discovery of human persistence hunting. While other predators relied on speed or stealth for quick kills, humans had developed the ability to pursue their prey for days without stopping. They would follow wounded animals across vast distances until blood loss and fatigue made them easy targets. They were pursuit predators who never gave up once they had chosen their victim. The research revealed that humans did not have the strongest muscles or the sharpest teeth or the fastest speed, but they had something more dangerous than any of those physical advantages. They had the ability to think multiple steps ahead and plan for situations that had not happened yet. They could imagine dozens of different scenarios and prepare for all of them at the same time. When Veltar read about human warfare, his hands began to shake. These creatures had spent thousands of years fighting each other with weapons that could destroy entire cities. They had learned to kill from distances their enemies could not even see. They had developed strategies so complex that victory was decided before the first shot was fired. The commander realized with growing horror that his people had made a terrible mistake. They had captured what they thought was a helpless old prey animal, but they had actually brought aboard the most dangerous type of predator in the known galaxy. Not just any predator, but an apex predator whose species had conquered their entire planet by being smarter than everything that tried to kill them. That evening, Veltar went to the prison section to confront Dongsu face to face. He wanted to look into the human's eyes and see what kind of creature he was really dealing with. The old man was sitting calmly on his thin mattress reading a book he had somehow acquired from somewhere. He looked up when the commander approached his cell. The Kethran leader demanded to know how Dongsu had defeated his warriors so easily. He accused the human of hiding his true nature and pretending to be weaker than he really was. He said no, prey animals should be able to fight like that against proper predators. His voice was loud and angry, but underneath the anger was something that sounded like fear. Dongsu closed his book and looked at Veltar with those calm, steady eyes that missed nothing. He said that the commander was making the same mistake that all failed predators made. They assumed that being bigger and stronger automatically made them better hunters. But size and strength were just tools, and tools were only useful if you knew how to use them properly. He explained that humans had learned long ago that the most dangerous opponents were often the ones who looked the weakest. A creature that survived on a world full of bigger predators had to be smart and adaptable, and willing to do whatever was necessary to win. Those traits were much more valuable than sharp claws or powerful muscles. The old man stood up slowly and walked to the bars of his cell. He was so much smaller than the massive alien commander, but somehow he seemed to fill the entire space around him with quiet confidence. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, but every word hit like a hammer blow. "You are predators," he said, looking directly into Veltar's glowing red eyes, "but we are apex predators. The difference is that predators hunt prey animals that run away and hide and hope to survive. Apex predators hunt other predators who think they are the most dangerous things in their territory. We are what predators have nightmares about." The word sent a chill through Veltar's body that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. He had spent his entire life believing that his people were the ultimate hunters in the galaxy. They had conquered hundreds of worlds and enslaved thousands of species. Nothing had ever stood against them successfully until now. But this old human was telling him that there was an entire species of creatures who specialized in hunting things like him. Creatures who had spent millions of years learning how to kill predators that were bigger and stronger and more naturally armed than they were. Creatures who saw his claws and teeth not as advantages, but as predictable weaknesses to exploit. Dongsu continued speaking in that same quiet voice that somehow carried more authority than any amount of shouting. He said that every species they, Kethran, had conquered made the same mistake they were making now. They fought like prey animals using desperation and fear as their weapons. But humans fought like apex predators using patience and intelligence, and the absolute certainty that no predator could escape them forever. The commander backed away from the cell bars, feeling something he had never experienced in his long life, as a hunter. For the first time, he was looking at another creature and wondering if he was the one being hunted. The old man's words echoed in his mind as he fled back to his quarters. Apex predators hunt other predators. We are what predators have nightmares about. That night, Veltar did not sleep at all. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything he had learned. His ship was flying through space, carrying what he now realized might be the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. And that creature was locked in a cell in his prison, studying his weaknesses and making plans that the commander could not even imagine. Somewhere in the darkness, an old human was getting ready to show the Kethran what it really meant to be apex predators. The fear that Dongsu had planted in Commander Veltar's mind grew like a cancer over the next few days. The Kethran leader found himself jumping at shadows and starting at unexpected sounds. He could not eat properly or sleep through the night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the old human's calm face and heard those terrible words. "We are apex predators. We hunt other predators." The crew began to notice their commander's strange behavior, and it made them nervous too. Kethran society was built on strength and confidence. When the strongest member of their pack showed fear, it meant something truly dangerous was nearby. Whispered conversations spread through every deck of the ship about what the human prisoner might really be capable of. Some soldiers wanted Veltar to simply execute Dongsu and end the threat before it grew worse. Others argued that killing him now would make them look weak and afraid. A few suggested throwing the old man out an airlock and pretending he had tried to escape. But none of these solutions satisfied their commander's wounded pride. Veltar needed to prove to himself and his crew that Kethran were still the ultimate predators in the galaxy. The human had defeated a few warriors in controlled combat, but that did not mean he could survive against proper hunters in their natural element. The commander decided to organize the ultimate test of predator versus prey. He would release Dongsu into the lower levels of the ship where the maintenance tunnels and service corridors formed a maze of metal passages. The human would be given a 10-minute head start, and then hunting parties would be sent after him. This time there would be no rules or restrictions. The hunters would use every advantage they possessed to track down and kill their prey. The announcement was made throughout the ship during the evening meal period. Every crew member would have a chance to volunteer for the hunting parties. Weapons would be provided along with tracking equipment and communication gear. The human would be released with nothing but the clothes on his back. It would be a fair hunt by Keth. The climax arrives when Dongsu reaches the ship's command center. He spent hours systematically dismantling the Kethron hunting parties, not through violence, but through superior strategy and understanding of his environment. The aliens, who prided themselves on being perfect predators, discover they're helpless against a prey species that thinks 10 steps ahead. Veltar waits in the command center with his elite guards, confident that the humans' luck has finally run out. But when the doors open, it's not just Dongsu who enters, it's all the freed prisoners, armed with Kethron weapons and working together under human leadership. The commander realizes that this old man didn't just escape. He organized a complete rebellion using nothing but words and patience. The final confrontation isn't a battle, it's a demonstration. Dongsu offers Veltar and his crew a choice: surrender the ship and face judgment from the species they've wronged, or fight and face the consequences of challenging apex predators. When Veltar chooses to fight, thinking his natural weapons give him an advantage, Dongsu proves that intelligence trumps instinct every time. The story ends with the liberated prisoners taking control of the ship and using it to rescue their homeworlds. Dongsu becomes a legend among the freed species, not as a warrior or hero, but as living proof that true predators don't need claws or teeth. They need patience, intelligence, and the absolute certainty that no prey escapes forever. In the final scene, as they approach Earth to report their success, Dongsu looks out at the stars and thinks about Su Jin, his granddaughter who dreams of exploring space. He smiles, knowing that when humanity finally ventures into the galaxy, they'll do so not as conquerors, but as the apex predators they've always been, patient, intelligent, and absolutely unstoppable when protecting what they love.